Greetings wherever you are, and welcome to the Ministry of Propaganda. I'm your intern host, Richard Nixon, and these are the top stories of the week from around the world. We got a real mess on our hands, folks. A bunch of top-secret Pentagon documents have been leaked on social media, exposing the U.S.'s deep penetration into Russia's military and intelligence services. And if that's not bad enough, it looks like we're spying on our closest allies, too, including Ukraine, Israel, and South Korea. Sure, we've been able to pass on crucial intel to Ukraine, but now that we've exposed our sources, they're in even deeper trouble. And don't even get me started on how this leak is screwing up our relationships with our allies. On Friday, investigators in the U.S. arrested a 21-year-old man in connection with the leak. The man, Jack Teixeira, was a member of the intelligence wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, and he oversaw an online gaming group of racist, God and gun-loving teenagers, where he thought it would be a good idea to share the top-secret documents. Great job, Teixeira. Those distinguished gentlemen, Rich and Chris, will be going into the contents of the leaked secret documents in detail in just a moment. In stranger news, the Dalai Lama, of all people, apologized after a video surfaced online showing him kissing a boy on the lips and then saying to the child, "Suck my tongue. I mean, what the heck, Dolly? A creepy old man." President Biden is in Ireland this week. President Biden's 5-day visit to Northern Ireland and Ireland is filled with sentimental Irishness, but is he actually doing anything diplomatic? He'll be celebrating the Good Friday Agreement, which ended sectarian violence 25 years ago. Let's hope he's not just there for the photo ops. Meanwhile, this week, China has been busy with their military exercises for the past few days around Taiwan. And it looks like it's their response to the visit of Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen to the U.S. They're doing air and sea combat drills on all sides of Taiwan, and they're even having a live fire exercise near Pingtan, a Chinese island facing Taiwan. Taiwan reports that China sent 71 military aircraft around the island, including 45 that crossed the median line in the Taiwan Strait. They usually don't do that. Macron visited China this week, too, along with some Ursula something or other EU leader. The French leader is not playing along with the U.S. efforts to put China in check. Macron's European priorities are different from the U.S.'s. And, of course, he drew flack for saying that Taiwan is not Europe's problem. The guy is trying too hard to be independent, and it's not working out too well. He's even suggesting that Europe can't be a vassal of the U.S. on issues about Taiwan security. Yeah, right. Someone might remind him of the thousands of protesters marching and burning trash in France against his pension plan. Speaking of which, the Constitutional Court in France on Friday just approved those very pension reforms. Will this lead to more protests? Macron, my Dan, only time will tell. On the economic side of things, the IMF cuts its forecast for global growth yet again. Japan, Germany, and India are all expected to experience lower growth, while Chinese state media reports that Tesla will build a factory in Shanghai to make megapacks, its large-scale batteries. Apparently, China is also leading in the race for the next big thing in rechargeable batteries. They want to replace lithium with sodium, which is way cheaper and abundant. Good for them. Shareholders are gathering in Washington for the annual spring meeting of the World Bank. A.J. Banga, expected to be confirmed as the bank's president. He better be ready to answer some tough questions about how he's going to use the bank to tackle climate change. And he's from the developing world. Big whoop. We'll see if that actually makes any difference. Banga has to walk a fine diplomatic line. He better not trip up because he's been nominated by the Biden administration to weaken China's influence in the developing world. Turning to some news from Africa, the two generals ruling Sudan after a coup 18 months ago are supposed to hand over power to a civilian government this week. Let's hope they actually do it and don't find some way to cling to power. And in Yemen, a new round of talks to end 8 years of civil war is made more interesting by the surprise rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who have been backing opposing sides in the conflict. Let's see if they can actually come to an agreement and bring some peace to the region. Speaking of peace and conflict, North Korea also fired a ballistic missile this week, just to remind us they're still around. And finally, there was a deadly bombing attack in rebel-held territory in Myanmar. Apparently, it's the worst since the junta seized power in a coup last year. At least 100 people, including 30 children, are confirmed dead. Will the violence in Myanmar ever end? It's unimaginable to me that someone could carelessly drop bombs in Southeast Asia. Well, that's all from me for this week. Please like, share, and subscribe. Now, over to our hosts, Rich and Chris. This is the Ministry of Propaganda helping you think.
Thank you, Richard Nixon. Yes, tonight we are going to be talking about the leaked documents that have come out over the last sort of week. Even though they've been sitting on Discord servers and War Thunder servers and chats of games, video game chats for a few months, they've all come out, these leaked documents, which we've all been hearing about, which do give an assessment, a very top secret and secret assessment of the situation in Ukraine, at least from the NATO side, from the US side. There are over 100 documents that were leaked. We haven't been able to access all of them yet. If we get more, we will obviously go through them. But we're looking at about maybe 6 or 8 of the main ones, which have been published on the New York Times and shared elsewhere. Primarily, we've got some from Glenn Greenwald, the famous journalist who also helped out with Edward Snowden. But yeah, Chris, so pretty excited to go through this. This is a very interesting leak. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, so straight away, the fact that you've said Edward Snowden, one of the sections of these leaks obviously deals with what's apparently been a revelation again, that America's spying on all of its allies. Obviously, everyone seems to have forgotten that this was already common knowledge news. Edward Snowden showed us, I think the Simpsons movie showed us before that. We know at this stage that America spies on everybody. It's almost quite embarrassing that this got pulled up and questioned with Biden whilst he was stood next to the president of Ireland, having to defend the fact that he's spying on his allies yet again. So it is incredibly embarrassing for anybody in the American government today, and all around quite a hilarious development.
Yeah. I suppose we should just deal with this one while we start on the validity of these documents. So everyone keeps referencing Operation Mincemeat, which was the operation to stuff a bunch of seemingly important battle plans relating to D-Day in World War II into the body of a sailor and putting him in an officer's uniform. And the Germans found this body, and it was designed to be a decoy, so that they thought that the landings in World War II, D-Day landings, would happen in Calais and not at Normandy. So everyone keeps referencing that, don't forget, this kind of happens, this kind of thing happens, misinformation. So that is still actually a discussion. But I think, as time is going on and more sort of fallout from these documents is happening, I do think these are actually genuine, because the advantage given on the battlefield, if this was a decoy, versus the fallout from from South Korea, from Egypt, also even for the UK. One of the things we'll go into here is the special forces, the fact that we have 50 special forces in Ukraine, along with other nations too. So I am leaning towards them being valid. It still could be a decoy. There could be some, it could be a mixed bag, a decoy in some senses. But I don't know. It does seem to me that the political fallout doesn't seem that worth it. I don't know what your thoughts on that, Chris, that one.
Yeah, I think beginning when the leaks first became public, there was the allegation that it could be misinformation aimed at confusing both sides. I think that's starting to sort of wear thin now, that it's very much likely that these are genuine. Well, more so than likely, 95% sure that these are genuine documents and not misinformation. That's not to say that some documents that have made it online haven't been tweaked afterwards, people nudging numbers to make them higher or lower death counts, per se, on either Russia's side or Ukraine's side, to make one side look worse than the other. But obviously these are minor adjustments after the fact. I think that, as you said, the content of these is so embarrassing. It's not. It would be a home goal for it to be misinformation, showing that America have been basically spying on their own allies, and that America's allies have been making deals with the Russians, and that it's things with the Israelis that we're going to get into. There's too much there that wouldn't make sense for it to be misinformation.
Right, exactly.
And of course, the fact that there's been arrests as well, which is
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the arrest as well, which happened, I think, whatever, in the last 24 hours of this this guy. I mean, that part is quite confusing to me. Just to mention that briefly. What was his name again, Chris? You got the pronunciation just a moment ago.
Teixeira. Jack Teixeira. We'll just have to look at Spanish Portuguese name.
That's better than anything else I can come up with. It. So Teixeira. Yeah. So what I found interesting about this guy is he's 21. Yeah. From what it seems, a non-commissioned, not an officer. I don't think he might even be a very low rank. It might be the equivalent of a private. And it's a National Guard unit. So at best, he's an assistant or a collator in some headquarters somewhere. I believe he was in. It's in a really very small, insignificant base actually. But the bottom line is, it's quite sort of shocking if this is the case, if it is valid, which it appears to be. They're now locking him up with leaking these documents. Is such a low level, such a low ranking individual, 21 as well, getting top secret documents. So. I mean, I was in the army. To see a top secret document, that is very, very, very rare. And intelligence always needs to know basis. So the fact that he was handling this, I mean, it looks like a bit of a poor sort of operational security and intelligence security on the Americans' part. To get a 21-year-old who also doesn't seem to be the most sort of sound mind, who runs a Discord channel where he's the boss and he's called OG and all this kind of stuff. So. I think
that's this doesn't seem to have been like when we had these Cold War spies, everything was like the Rosenbergs who leaked nuclear secrets from the Americans, and the Americans executed them. These espionage were ideological. This doesn't seem to have been that he's leaked it to his Discord channel, Thug Central. What is it called?
Thug Shaker Central.
Yeah. So he's done this for clout amongst his mates.
Yeah, at least
anything ideological there. He's literally just done it for the lols.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's the part that is really shocking. That this is not even a leak with state action. So just on that point of initially they were saying, it's a Russian. The Russians have leaked this. The Ukrainians, for example, said that it was a Russian operation. There's no incentive for the Russians to release this. Why would they disclose their sources and give away what they know? There's no reason for them to do that.
And it was a gamer with a camera.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, let's jump into these documents. So we've got these from Glenn Greenwald's Substack. You can see them there yourself. So I'm going to go into the first one here, that in his order that he presented them. Give me one moment. Okay, so the first one we have is, of course, the status of the conflict as of the 1st of March. Okay, so obviously these are not, sort of straight out of the oven. They're a little bit behind. So we're talking about, 6 weeks nearly. I'm just going to read the top line. So this one obviously gives you, the status of the conflict overall as of the 1st of March. So this first sort of paragraph here is quite, concise, and gives you, what their overall assessment is. Okay, so I'll just read it to you. As of the 1st of March, Russian and PMC Wagner forces continue to focus on seizing Bakhmut, while the Ukrainian armed forces consolidated gains in the vicinity of Kherson, so IVO means in vicinity of, and reinforced defenses in the vicinity of Bakhmut to protect its remaining GLOC, which is ground line of communication, from potential Russian advance in eastern Ukraine. Russian forces continued ground operations in Donetsk and were establishing a defense in depth between Kherson and Zaporizhia. The central and western groupings of troops were in the vicinity of Bakhmut and Crimea, while the southern and eastern grouping of troops were in the vicinity of Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts. Okay, so, I mean, nothing overwhelmingly interesting actually from that line there, even though this is top secret. So bear in mind that, this is the first time I've seen a top secret document. In the UK, top secret documents are actually pink. The paper will be pink, but this is American, so I guess they don't follow that rule. But yeah, so that first line, nothing particularly interesting. I mean, we knew there were troops in Bakhmut. We knew that there was troops in even Kherson. It's quite logical. And then you've got, your map here, right? So you can see the green is where the Ukrainian assessed forces are, and red, obviously, with disputed territory, disputed areas, and whatever. A bit of a mess here, so we're not going to go through all of that. But you can see the Ukrainians do have an importance on Odessa, so they've got a big cluster there. Obviously, a beach landing, and if they lost that, sea port, that would be a pretty dramatic thing for them. They would, be cut off from exporting and importing all sorts of things. And then, of course, you've got your big cluster around Kiev and up near Kharkov and whatever. And then, the rest is where you would expect on the front line. Any initial thoughts on this one, Chris?
No, not really. I'm sort of trying to get my head around what it sort of means, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it is just an assessment. So so this is, I mean, we don't know what these documents were, if this is just a route. I mean, this appears to be just a routine document. So status of the conflict. So this is just to brief.
This is just one pager, isn't it? Just.
Yeah. This is just a general briefing. So I don't think it's giving you plans and whatnot. So it's an overall assessment of the battle, basically.
Yeah.
So on your left-hand side, you've got, how many Ukrainian forces are available, Russian battalion counts, and then obviously on the far left, you've also got, ground, maritime, and air defense, what happened. So actually, I'll read, there's a couple things on the left here which were quite interesting. So it does talk about, obviously, the Wagner seizing platoon sort of size positions in Bakhmut. Now, bear in mind, this is obviously the 27th of Feb, that's it, right? So, in fact, the fighting in Bakhmut has advanced in Russians' favor quite dramatically in the last 6 weeks. So, this was actually, I think, Soledar had only just been taken a few weeks before this. So,
and that's the little salt mining town just outside of Bakhmut, just south of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, a lot has actually changed since this assessment. So, I think the current version of this will be a bit more, it'll show. I think there'll be a bit more dramatic.
Because Wagner are now at least taking the city centre.
Yes.
The city hasn't completely fallen, but
yeah. What's interesting here, then, of course, is that they also say that basically Ukrainian special services, so Ukrainian spies, addressed that its agent in Belarus violated orders and attacked a Russian aircraft in a Belarusian airfield. I believe it's one of those aircraft with a big satellite on the back, and electronic warfare aircraft that they attacked. But apparently they were not following orders, so breaking orders there, because that's an attack in Belarus. Obviously, that's quite important because, Belarus hasn't, even though the Russians, invaded Ukraine from there, the Belarusians haven't committed themselves to the fighting yet. But if the Ukrainians start bringing the fight to Belarus, then maybe it might change the calculus on the ground, which is probably why they were not given those orders to attack Russian assets in Belarus. There's just some stuff here about the Russian Black Fleet doing torpedo tests, not particularly interesting. But then the one that I think the most interesting here, two interesting things. One is that the Belgians refused. So yes, Belgians reported that it is unwilling to donate aircraft to Ukraine, but will consider providing maintenance and logistics aid for other countries. So you can see a bit of a crack there amongst NATO nations and European nations as to their supply and support operations for Ukraine. Yeah. And the other one was this one here. So this is in the space and cyber section, is that the Russian aerospace forces addressed. Sorry, 1 second. It is quite difficult to read these documents. Yes, this is it. So forces assessed it successfully diverted a Ukrainian missile from its intended course by using some sort of electronic warfare. So using some sort of, they managed to counter a missile launched from Ukraine using electronic warfare. So this is another thing that's quite important with drones, is these quadricopters, as well as other types of drones that are playing quite an important role in the war. There are techniques being developed, electronic warfare techniques to counter them. So this is a development, I guess. Any other thoughts on this one, Chris, or anything, observations on this?
Yeah, so obviously the document itself is a little bit out of date from now, but obviously I think we did a review around this time, and it does seem to be holding true of, it's pretty much where we expected it to be. But obviously, like I said, there's no plans on this document of where we're going. There's a section here, I can't really read this. Total assessed losses. Can you make out what that says?
Yeah. I'll read it out for you. Yeah. So total assessed losses. So assessed combat sustainability, moderate. So that's for Russia. And on this version of the document, the KIA, so killed in action statistic, is 35.5 thousand to 43.5 thousand. So yeah, that's the US assessment of how many Russian dead there are. But this is a bit confusing. So a lot of people, this has probably been the most discussed element of all of these documents, I would say. Because firstly, there was a debate as to what is the original. So some people say that Russian people on Telegram and whatever reposted this with the numbers switched, and other people say the Americans did it. So it's as we've said before, this statistic, the KIA statistic, the casualty statistic, is the most political statistic of the war. So no surprise that straight away is this smoke being cast on it. So yeah, just to clarify then, so on this one, they put the Russians' casualties at potentially up to 43,000 dead, okay? But the Ukrainian casualties only at 17.5 KIA. Excuse me if I get this wrong, but it's this, as everyone knows, these documents are really blurry. But anyway, yeah, 43,000 dead for the Russians and 17,000 dead for the Ukrainians, give or take.
That does seem like a fairly realistic number. Like, realistically, the attacker takes more casualties than a defender. So it makes sense for it to be this way around.
Yeah. I mean, if this is accurate, if we recall when we did our 1-year review, your total casualty rates, both sides were actually quite similar from various sources. So both were over 100,000, maybe 150,000. But if we assume that, those are correct, then what we can see here is that if this is accurate, that the Russians are less able to save their wounded. So their casualties have a higher death rate. This could be true. I mean, yeah, if this is accurate. I mean, yeah. Bear in mind also, even though this is a genuine document, the assessments might be incorrect. So so that's something to say. I mean, we all remember Iraq, right? So that was intelligence. Intelligence
and that's
told them
also something I suppose that we're going to get in short with the debate that's going on within Russia at the moment of the allegations that the FSB have been given incorrect numbers of Russian casualties. But the issue seems to be because there's so many agencies and so many factions fighting on the Russian side with Wagner and the conscripts, the professional soldiers, and the ones who were brought in from the prisons. There's the issue of double counting, and of course, certain agencies not knowing what counts. If you're saying, well, how many dead soldiers have we got? So what do Wagner class as dead soldiers, or are they counting their own?
Yeah. And of course, I mean, statistics are right. Also, how you count things. Statistics are always, what is it? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So there's always different ways of counting things whenever you come to assessing anything. Yeah. So I believe there probably is a lot of confusion over that. And then also you have the the DPR forces. Are they counted as Russian casualties? Are they separate? If you count those in, that would give you a higher Russian total, I think. Of course it would. They're on the ground, they're fighting. Interesting stuff. Anyway, I mean, they obviously talked about vehicles too. So 6,004 ground vehicles lost by the Russians. On the Ukrainian side, it doesn't give any vehicles, which I find a bit strange because you usually stick with the same metrics. But they've gone for 60 fighter bombers lost and 11 strategic SAMs. So that's strategic surface-to-air missiles, so anti-aircraft vehicles, and 34 tactical SAMs, so smaller SAMs for smaller distances. I think the last thing I want to mention on this, from my angle at least, is according to this assessment, the Russian battalion counts. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of the stats because it gives you, how many there are and which are in reserve and which are auxiliary and all this kind of stuff. But it's the commitment rate. So committed in conflict, they say 527 of 544. I believe that's what it says, which is a 97% commitment rate. So obviously that's not the entire Russian army. There's obviously loads and loads of Russian forces still in Russia. And the Air Force, of course, has not been committed, So this is obviously of the troops that they've, earmarked to be in the conflict. So they say 97% committed. Obviously some in reserve, so they're not in fighting, but they are committed to at least a position within the conflict, whether that's at the back or at the front. which that is quite a high commitment rate. Yeah. And then, of course, the other one is they say that, so located inside Ukraine, 474 out of 527, 90% committed. So either of those statistics, whatever they mean, obviously, I might be a bit rusty on exactly the difference between committed and committed in country or located inside country, but it's 97 and 90 according to the Americans, which is high. If it's true, it's a very high commitment rate. So it says to me that there's not a lot of Russian, a reserve to commit, so extra reserve. So if the Ukrainians do get a big boost, the Russians are going to need to also either dig in and absorb the push, by holding ground and fighting defensively, or they need to have another, big recruitment drive, another mobilization of some sort.
Yeah, and that does seem to be what the whispers on the Russian side are at the moment of another mobilization coming.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first document. Just trying to see if there's anything last comments on this one. I mean, we've already said top secret. So just for clarity, this acronym here, no foreign. So this is for no foreign nationals. So I guess we're very lucky to be seeing this as foreign nationals. Anyway, there's a whole lot of bunch of acronyms here. I'm not going to go through them.
Worth just mentioning it here then, just as you've said that, is we're not entirely sure of the legalities of what we're doing. The leaks out, but that doesn't make these documents any less top secret. I'm pretty sure as far as the Americans are concerned, these are still top secret. They haven't been declassified just because they've been leaked. So there is we are very much in a gray area. And just anecdotally, it may be worth mentioning that a lot of people haven't seen these documents because there seems to be some sort of throttle by network providers in loading these documents. We've experienced this today, trying to find these today, and it takes, in some cases, it doesn't load at all. In other cases, a few minutes to actually get the website to actually load. So it does seem to be that the networks have been given a collection of keywords to deprioritize. If anyone else has experienced that, please let us know. But that does seem to be the case.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm following sort of Glenn Greenwald's lead on this one. These are the ones he's published. These are also the documents that have been published by the New York Times and are available on Twitter too. So I'm gonna hide under Elon Musk's umbrella and just say that, well, you can't delete stuff from the internet. Sorry, buddy. We'll see how that goes for me. Anyway, so next one we've got then is actually we'll save the lethal aid from Israel to last, actually, because I think that's a bit different. So let's go for the J3 daily update. So you've already seen this is an episode full of acronyms. So welcome to the wonderful world of military acronyms. So I will try and guide you a bit on this. So can you see that there, Chris? You got that?
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm zooming a bit. Okay. So this is similar to the first document. So this is a Joint Staff J3, J4, J5 update. So J3 is operations, J4 is logistics, and J5 is sort of policy and other stuff, depending on what level you're at. But this is just for general operations and logistics update. Okay. So yeah, again, a similar sort of just, sort of quite high view, sort of this is what's going on, right? This doesn't have a nice little summary at the top for us. So I'll just pick out some of the stuff that I think are the most interesting. Actually, yes, the most interesting bit on this thing is this little box here. So it says a US NATO Special Operations Forces in Ukraine. So that's what SOF stands for, okay? And then you have this nice little thing here, 14 times PAX. PAX is the military term for personnel, people, okay? So the USA has 14 Special Forces soldiers in in Ukraine. Britain has 50, so the most. France has 15. Latvia has 17, and the Netherlands has 1. So there's one lonely Dutch Special Forces guy there. So, but yeah, that's there. And I think this is probably the most controversial one for at least the UK, because we've not been told, us, the public, the people who pay for this stuff, about our special forces being deployed. They are deployed in Ukraine, which is, at least for some people in the UK, that would be controversial, having not consulted the public on the deployment of our special forces in a very, very arguably very dangerous situation, which may lead to nuclear war. So yeah, and what happens if these guys get captured, and what happens if they get killed or something like this?
Yeah. That's it. If they get killed there, then it then has to become public. It's then very difficult to suppress. Obviously, it's out now. We know. We don't know who these individuals are. But obviously, from the Russian perspective, they've been telling everyone that this is a war between Russia and NATO. And this little box pretty much confirms that was true. We are there.
Yeah. And there's also, I think, I stand to be corrected, but I do believe there was a denial made at some point that there were no soldiers, no boots on the ground. They might have said there's people who are assisting with delivery and some other sort of terminology, and maybe embassy staff, but no, there was no boots on the ground. This is boots on the ground. Bear in mind that also, just to clarify that, these might be, some of them, depending on the nation, might be guards for embassies. I'm not sure, again, I'm a bit rusty as to whether the British embassy has been opened again in Kiev. I know the American one is. But so at least for the Americans, they do outline that there's 100 US PAX personnel in Ukraine, and of course, Department of State, 71 of them, Department of Defense, 29, and then all sorts of other, individuals, these organizations here. So this is, for example, MSAU is the Marine Security Augmentation Unit. So this is the guys who guard the embassy. So I don't know. It might be the case that these are defending our diplomats. I don't know, but they're still special forces on the ground in Ukraine. They're not. You could use local. You could use police or something different to this. I don't know. It seems to me that that this is a deployment. Yeah. Then what else we got on this? So let me just zoom out a bit there. Okay. So 1 second. This talks about meetings at the top left. Some missile launches. 1 second, and then. Kind of interesting over here is that it does tell us how many American ships and troops and where they are. So not in Ukraine specifically, so the special forces aren't mentioned, but what you can see here is you've got 52,000 troops in US European Command. So that's in Germany. It'll be Ramstein and I think Stuttgart, and then also the ships. So it tells you that the George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group is in there. They're somewhere in Europe Central Command, and then there's 4 submarines. So there's four normal submarines and 1 strategic guided missile submarine somewhere in the European area of operations. So AOR, right? And then of course it says there's 1,200 troops in Jasionka. I had to Google where that was. So Jasionka is the little Polish town across the border by Lviv. So that's where they are.
Just confirm we will be offering a prize for anybody who can tell us where those submarines are.
Yes, definitely. A wonderful prize. Overall, this document, though, not particularly. There's loads of detail. If you're watching this and you would like us to go through this line by line, we can do that. Just have to comment and tell us that you would like that, because we can. But a lot of it is just acronyms, death by jargon. So we can do that. Just want to check if there was anything else here. Chris, any sort of thoughts on this one? Any sort of feelings on this?
No, not really. I feel like the personnel was the sort of bulk of the information on this. This is, again, it's slightly out of date. The fact that when's this dated? What date? 23rd of March.
23rd of March.
Yeah. So obviously NATO, Finland joined on the 31st. So it's slightly out of date at this point. It'd be interesting to see if, unfortunately, with the kid getting arrested, I doubt there's any new documents coming, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yes. I think the last thing for this one is just on the G4. So the logistics over here on the right-hand side. The G5 just mentions a couple of meetings. So bilateral with the Italian chief of defense, blah, 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 blah. But logistics. So your GMLRS, that's the guided multiple launch rocket system. So these are the rounds for the HIMARS, the famous HIMARS rockets that, have played such an important role in the conflict, according to the West, according to the Ukrainian. So it's very difficult to read this.
I can see underneath it, there's something about a delivery of Patriots as well. PDA deliveries, if I'm reading
PDA
that correct.
deliveries, a Patriot, yes, en route, none. Next 24 hours, none. But bear in mind that this is a very particular window, so it doesn't necessarily mean there's none on the way at all.
It just means there wasn't in this slither of time that we're capturing.
Yeah. PDA delivery. So I had to Google PDA. PDA stands for post-delivery availability. So I didn't do logistics, so I'm not an expert on that one. I'll have to. I don't know whether that means that there's none coming at all, or whether it's this window. I would think it's this window, this particular period, because if you look later, you'll see we'll discuss the air defense. It seems they are sending Patriot stuff. Anyway, but the this on the right-hand side has got a date, and I think this is the last delivery date, because if this is March 23rd, then 18th of March, it can't. I thought some people have been saying it might be an expiry date when they're going to run out of rounds. It's not, because this is already after the fact. But you can see this kind of sort of firing rates here. So we're not going to go into the artillery sort of discussion yet, because I think I haven't got the Russian statistics, but everyone knows, it's been commented quite a lot, that the Russians have far more ammo and are firing a lot more artillery.
Which is, we've talked about this before, that the sort of quite obvious reason for that is that the Russians stockpiled from the Soviet days. Everything, all that stuff's still good. It all still fires, where America seemed to be much more of a, as they were with COVID masks, just on time and just enough sort of economy. If something's out of date for the Americans, they simply throw it away and replace it with a much more high-tech, more expensive, but it means that everything's so finite for them. I feel like this situation that we're in now might be a catalyst for that, for a change in mentality going forward. It won't help them in this war, but it might help them in the next one.
Should we move on to the next one? We've got the combat makeup. Okay, so this one is quite. I think this one is really interesting, actually. This one talks about the upcoming April or spring offensive, I should say. So let's get that up in here. Combat makeup. So this one talks about basically the readiness and what the upcoming spring offensive will have. So vehicles, where they're being trained, how many sort of, basically any issues with ammunition, training readiness rates, equipment readiness rates, and then just sort of other things, where they're being located and all sorts of stuff. So it's quite a mess to look at. So let's not get lost in the woods on this one. So what I'll say is, or bring your attention to, is you've got your January, your February, March, April, and over here, then your notes. Okay, so if you see on the top right there, you've got your spring offensive on that red sort of orange bar, and 31st of March and 30th of April. Okay, so I'll read the first line of this, and that'll then obviously, all fall into place then. So as it says here, based on known contributions, training pathways, and projections, 12 combat credible brigades can be generated for the spring counteroffensive, 3 internally by Ukraine, not depicted, and 9 are trained and equipped by US, allied, and partner. Of the 9 brigades, 6 brigades will be ready by the 31st of March, and the final 3 brigades by the 30th of April. Equipment delivery times will impact training and readiness in order to meet this timeline. Total equipment required for 9 brigades is 253 tanks, 381 mechanized vehicles, 480 motorized vehicles, and 147 artillery, plus the delivery of 571 US up-armored Humvees. Okay, so a lot of kit. It's a lot of kit. It's a big assault. I can't remember the statistic for how many tanks the Russians made the initial invasion with, but I don't think it's far off what you're talking about there. If you want to focus on one number, 381 tanks is a decent amount of armor. Initial thoughts on that, Chris?
So obviously, I think I've been able to look into the Washington Post did a sort of review of this and broke it down. And by the looks of it, the analysis that they've come up with is that it doesn't look to be a tremendous counter assault that they're going to be able to mount. They've actually used the words that it's going to only be able to pull back modest territory. It doesn't seem to be a drop in the ocean that they would need. So I can't see very. I still think that by the time we get around to our 18-month review, I can't see the territory changing very much.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to make a difference for them.
I'm curious about this. So the NATO standard for an attack is 3-1. You should always have 3 and the enemy should have 1. That's the kind of numbers you're working off. I don't think the Russians have that little stuff that if we're just focusing on tanks, what would that be, like 70 tanks holding the place where the counterattack will take place. I mean, obviously this attack will take place in one particular, assumingly, one, maybe 2 particular
also places. When you just look at the numbers of 253 tanks, so let's go back onto what did we have in the last document of men. So America have got 14 men. So let's take it at the way that these are non-combatant, these are mechanics. Even with the British, another 50.
Yeah.
Altogether, we're talking like 100 men. 100 mechanics.
Yes, it's 100 forces. Yeah.
Working on this many vehicles. It's like these vehicles are going to need maintenance after every other attack.
Wait, just to clarify, so that those 100 special forces are in Ukraine. We don't know what they're doing. The training is taking place outside of Ukraine. So the preparation and training for all of that is involving probably all of NATO forces, not just the. It's just that 100 that are in country.
Yeah, but I think a lot of this weaponry being delivered, it is very much more for political optics than it is for actual tactical advantage. It looks good in front of a public, showing you're sending Ukraine these weapons, but when you're sending it to a group of soldiers who don't know how to maintain them, don't know how to repair them, these aren't the same. If you can repair a Soviet T-16, that doesn't mean you can repair one of these. These are completely different weapons.
Yeah. I must say that's the observation without getting lost in describing each of these vehicles. But you've got stuff that's ex-Soviet, so some of it's 40 years old, some of it's 50 years old. You've got British stuff, British artillery, then you've got American artillery, then you have very old tanks, T-55, so fucking nearly 70-year-old tank. You've then got German kit, French kit, Spanish kit. So the parts and just also manuals. So for example, I don't think there's a Ukrainian manual to fix a Spanish anti-aircraft gun.
That Simpsons episode where we're going to get a manual. What language is this? Oh, it doesn't. It's from a country that doesn't exist anymore. Just don't worry about it.
So, so if you just on how many different pieces of kit here, so all from all these countries. I don't know the percentage of English speaking. How many people in Ukraine can speak? How many Ukrainian men can speak English and read it at a proficient mechanical level where you can understand mechanical components? I imagine it's quite low. So that's just a small thing that's going to be a problem. But I mean, they are spending a few months training on these things. So if you look here, I mean, some of them have been, training 60% completion, right? So, and they've been trained in Poland. And for example, these guys I'm trying to find a note here telling you, sorry, it was on the other document, but you're talking about some of the training is sufficient, 2-3 months. Here we go. Yeah. So these guys are spending a month training on these artillery guns, for example. These guys are spending 2 months from January 13th of January to the 4th of March on training on BMPs, armored vehicles. So there is pretty good training. So just on a British, just to come to the British side of things. So these Challenger 2s, our very expensive Challenger 2 tanks. So they're being trained. Let me just double check. Yeah, so they're being trained. They started training on them on the 30th of January and they finished on the 6th of March. 14 of them. They should be they should be in country by April. So by now they're in country in Ukraine. But I still think, the point still stands. Yeah. The spare parts, the language barriers, this is
it's a logistic nightmare, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And you've got a Mad Max thing here. You've got vehicles from Afghanistan, as in British deployment to Afghanistan, American deployment. You've got old Soviet stuff. You've got modern German stuff. You've got Canadian stuff. It is a Mad Max wacky races combination of stuff.
Yeah, and you're going to get delivered assorted bags of tanks with assorted boxes of shells that fit certain tanks to fire these and that, but not in that. And they've all got, like I said, labeled with every language from here to you don't envy anyone in that sort of logistical
right. This is not a simple uniform arrangement here. And also just on small things, you can see that even some of the tanks here, so there's 17 tanks for this brigade here, they haven't decided what they will be. So I don't know how you're going to train people if they don't know what the tanks are going to be. These guys, this is one of the more complete. This is the most completely trained group, but they're missing their tank. As of what is this, late March, they're missing their tanks. They don't have their tanks, so I assume they're not trained. It's an assumption on my part, but it is a hodgepodge, a proper wacky racist hodgepodge. Just some notes on this. There was some notes about, so there's a problem with the ammo. So there's going to be a limited Challenger 2 ammo, apparently. And of course, there's also other issues relating to artillery ammo too, requiring ammo. It's a bit strange to me that there would be, you should know your stocks. And if you're committing kit, you should, know that about how many shells are going to be necessary for the deployment for the battle. It's strange. And then my final point for this one is it's important to see that the Ukrainians have only mustered 3. So 3 of these brigades are actually from Ukraine, internally generated by Ukraine. So the majority are NATO. So if you're saying, this is a proxy war for NATO, this is where you can see the most vivid example of this. This is now a proxy war. This is 9 brigades equipped with NATO kit and NATO training and NATO rounds. I'd say this is the most vivid depiction of the.
And exactly, and this is exactly what the Russians have been saying. It reminds me of a joke that is currently going around Russia that America will fight Russia until the very last Ukrainian life, and that seems to be exactly what they're doing here. And it's really is clear as day for anyone who cares to look at this point that this is a war between Russia and NATO.
So if this document is still accurate and nothing has changed, and it is valid, which it seems to be, we are, of course, over here, right? We're somewhere halfway through April. So the only stuff, so basically those 6 brigades are ready and I assume deployed or en route to be deployed.
Yep.
And your then remaining 3 brigades, so of the 9, will then be ready in 2 weeks. And that then fits into your spring offensive somewhere. So if this is accurate, we should see the spring offensive after the 30th of April. I don't see why they would not wait for the remaining 3 brigades to arrive.
Yeah. And it's interesting that in terms of the ammo, this confirms the story that came out a few weeks ago now that was shunned by the Western governments, that they were running out of ammunition. And this just confirms that does seem to be the case. That obviously, like we said, because Russia have got these stockpiles, America don't. And it seems now that they are very close to completely depleting their stocks, basically.
I also think that's what people deducted from that 155 millimeter ammo as well. That chart too, the heavy artillery shells.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we jump onto the air defense? The next one is the air defense, and then we'll go on to the lethal aid from Israel one. The air defense one is also pretty good. This one is basically showing you when they are going to run out of ammo for the anti-aircraft guns. It's pretty. I mean, I think this is probably the most alarming sort of document. So secret, this one, consolidated UAF air defenses. I'll read the bluff. So current Ukraine air defense plan balances limited resources to protect critical national infrastructure, population centers, front line of troops, and other key assets across Ukraine. Ukraine's ability to provide medium-range air defenses to protect the front line of troops will be completely reduced by May 23. Ukraine assessed to withstand 2 or 3 more wave strikes. As the first layer defense munitions run out, second and third layer expenditure rates will increase, reducing the ability to defend against Russian aerial attacks from all altitudes. So remember that date, May 23, is when this assessment says they are going to have reduced anti-air capabilities. And as it says, will increase, so reducing the ability to defend against Russian aerial attacks from all altitudes. So as we know, the Russian Air Force has not been committed as heavily as it could be to this fight, primarily because of air defense, because the Ukrainians have good old Soviet, S-300 anti-air, which is enough to keep them at bay, or has been at least so far. But that date there, 23rd of May, is very important, because if you just remember what we just saw, April 30th is when the last brigade is ready. So they have 3 weeks then before they're going to start running out of decent air cover.
Yeah, so obviously I think Russia have sort of been playing it correctly, where they've been throwing effectively the cheapest weapons, basically for this purpose of depleting the anti-air. I think that's what the attacks we got with Iranian drones was about, because a lot of these weapons, these are very cheap to produce. A little bit of a diversion, but obviously with what happened a few weeks ago with the Chinese balloon over America, and then a few weeks after that, the South Koreans made a similar allegation that they'd shot down a North Korean balloon over their territory, and it felt like this was the beginning of that sort of testing, being able to put up things that effectively cost about $100 to make, can drop ordnance, but cost hundreds of thousands to shoot down.
Right. Yeah, this has definitely been a very clever tactic from the Russians. So those Shahed drones, I'm going to get the numbers probably a bit off here, but it's something like $10,000 to make one of the Shahed drones, and it's like $100,000 to shoot it down. So on the financial side, it's just a losing game for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, NATO. And then the other thing is also just the quantity too, so not just the cost, but they can make a lot more of those and fire them off quite quickly. And then they're also firing empty missiles with no warheads. But it seems pretty obvious that the strategy is to deplete the anti-air, because once the Russians have a much bigger air force, and once they get the comfort of being able to use that air force, that's going to change the situation on the ground very heavily. So I mean, according to this, they've already run out of some stuff. So they ran out of SA-11s apparently yesterday. This was an assessment obviously made in February, but if this is accurate, they have already run out of SA-11s, and they will run out on the 3rd of May of SA-10, which is the S-300. So a bit of a confusing here. You've got two different naming systems. So the S-300 is the Russian name, or ex-Soviet names, and SA-10, SA-11 are the NATO names for the same things. Okay.
Yeah. So these are missile systems, aren't they?
These are anti-air missile systems. All of these are different anti-aircraft missile systems. I don't think we need to go through all of this. The general point to see is that they are running out, and they've already run out some of the NATO supplied stuff has already run out. So Iris-T ran out in February. That's the German supplied one, I believe. And then you've got NASAMS also running out today, apparently. And there are some coming in. So Patriot missiles, which is probably one of the best American systems, which is medium to long range. Those are also coming in. So they're being delivered, that stuff. And other older stuff like Hawk, which is also American, is also on the way. But there's negotiations and inspections on the way as well. But overall, the assessment says at the top, May 23, they're going to start running out of stuff that can effectively counter Russian air. So a bit of a mixed bag. So I think the other document we saw showing how 12 brigades are coming, and they'll be probably launching attack from the 1st of May onwards. That's quite alarming, I guess, for the Russians. This one is quite alarming for the Ukrainians. That if that assault, the spring offensive starts, the later it starts, the less air cover they're going to have, unless NATO commits a bunch of anti-air systems.
So effectively, NATO's coming with a load of armor, but don't worry because they haven't got anything to fire over them. So
Right. I've also heard that they're going to give bonuses to the Russians that kill the first Abrams tanks, the first American Abrams tanks. So there's going to be a financial incentive for that, as you'd expect. Yeah. Any other final thoughts on this one then, Chris, for the aerial defense stuff?
No, I feel like we knew this before the leaks, so it's good to be sort of validated with what we've been saying for a few weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump then onto the lethal aid from Israel. So this is the final document that we can see on Greenwald's site and other newspapers too. And this one is more of a political document. So what we're seeing here is the assessment from the Americans as to how and the likelihood of getting the Israelis to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. So if you look at this sort of diagram, you've got the most plausible on the left, least plausible on the right. So I'll read the upfront brief here. So Israel has committed to providing non-lethal aid to Ukraine, comprised of intelligence, counter UAS support, I'm not sure if that's correct, and a civil early warning system as it seeks to maintain its freedom of action in Syria by balancing its ties with the US and Russia. Netanyahu indicated Israel has considered providing Ukraine and additional defensive systems and support at the UN. Jerusalem likely will consider providing lethal aid under increased US pressure or perceived degradation in its ties to Russia as a result of Moscow's actions in relation to Iran or Syria that undermine Israeli interests. Okay, so that's their assessment. So their most plausible situation is that they see Jerusalem adopts a Turkish model for Ukraine aid, what does that mean? It means Israel adopts Turkey's model, which is they do sell lethal aid defense systems or provides them through third-party entities. It openly advocates for a peaceful end to the conflict and offers to host mediation efforts. So yeah, Turkey still does have decent relations with Russia, but they do give those Bayraktar drones to the Ukrainians. So this is their most plausible thing. Next one, Russia expands strategic assistance to Iran. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but basically their second most plausible thing is that if Russia starts giving fighter jets to Iran, then the Israelis would then give more lethal aid to the Ukrainians. So tit for tat, right? Option 3, which is now less plausible, is Israel expands outreach to the US in relation to basically Russia giving, conventional weapons to Syria, as well as, so basically, if the Russians give better stuff to Syria, then the least plausible is if Russia gives like SAMs or S-300s or S-400s to Iran, and other sort of, I think it says metal alloys, so advanced stuff. So if the more the Russians give to Syria and Iran, basically, then the more Israel will give to Ukraine. So that's the best way to look at this document, the simplest way to look at this document. Yeah, this is top secret, by the way.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Because obviously Israel have got the Iron Dome. And as a lot of people have seen repeatedly, whenever conflict sort of stares up there, any rockets, like you can fire 15 rockets into Israel, very few will land anywhere of significance because the Iron Dome is very good at shooting them down. It's one of the most sophisticated anti-air systems in the world. Israel are, generally speaking, very tight with this system, mainly for the reason that they don't want anyone to get hold of it so that it can't be backward engineered. So it would be devastating for Russia if Ukraine got this. I personally can't see this happening. I don't see this happening, especially with the revelations that we're going to get into very shortly. I think this is even less likely to happen now, for reasons that we'll show soon. I can't see Israel being overly willing to cooperate with the Americans in any overly helpful manner. So hopefully that's the case.
Yeah, I'll actually bring up that now, which was this one here, right? So the intel leak, which we've all been discussing, US believes Israel can be pressured to supply lethal arms to Ukraine. Sorry, there's two articles. This is one. I think this is the one I want to go. Yeah, here we go. No, that's this. That's the other one. 1 second. It's the one from Is it Haaretz? Yeah, here we go. The leaked Pentagon. So this is from Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, and it talks about. Oh God, it's paywalled. Okay, so basically, me and Chris read this earlier. In this report, it talks about how Mossad were in favor of or helping the protesters who were protesting against Netanyahu's judicial reform. So if you follow the news, you'll know that there were these big protests in Israel about Netanyahu changing the law in Israel so that they could appoint the Supreme Court more directly and override the courts, basically, taking power in the courts. So undermining the tripartite system, the separation of powers, if you will. So yeah, this document said that Mossad was involved. I'm struggling to find the US link to that. So if you mind reminding us.
I've got something here. So on the 1st of March, a CIA assessment said that according to the intercepted communications, leaders of Israel's intelligence services had backed protests against Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial attempt to overhaul the country's judiciary. Mossad leaders advocated for Mossad officials and Israeli citizens to protest against the new Israeli government's proposed judicial reforms, including several explicit calls to action that decried the Israeli government, the assessment said. So, yeah, we were going to talk about this. We were going to do an entire episode on this, speculating that, as a few other commentators have had, I think even George Galloway brought this up in one of his episodes, that it seems that the ground is ready and ripe for a American-backed coup in Israel. Israel is one of America's greatest foreign assets, and instability in that country is not something that they're going to abide. They put up with it in a lot of other countries, but they wouldn't abide it. They'll let France literally burn to the ground before they get involved in that. But Israel is something that they will not allow in any way, shape, or form. It's their sphere of influence in the Middle East. It keeps all the Arab nations fearful and in check and unable to move. So when Netanyahu gets ambitions bigger than America, that they're willing to move in and have him removed. And I think this is evidence that is the direction that it's going. Just to sidetrack completely, there was another incident last week where members of the Israeli Air Force were refusing to take part in training in protest against the government. And historically speaking, when you've got the army joining in protest against the government, this is very much it's looking like it's that direction. I can completely see this happening.
Yes, no, I agree with you. That's true. When troops start protesting, it's never a good sign. That's never a good one. And I mean, we still might do a special on the Ukraine episode. So if you do want us to do that, then send us a message and comment and like. And of course, while we're here, while you're still listening, like, share, subscribe. Please hit the notifications bell. All of that stuff. Yes, we hit our mark of 250 subscribers. We'd like to get to 1,000 at some point, but let's aim for 500 first. That would be great. I think we should still cover Israel next week. If there isn't another big revelation or another bunch of documents come out or something very big, we had to reply to this one because it's been big news. I mean, talking about fallout, because that's what we're talking about. This is the fallout diplomatically from these leaks. So the other two big ones is Egypt and then South Korea. So I'll bring up Egypt first. So this one, I haven't seen anyone sort of share documents showing what they discussed. I think this one is these might be leaked, sort of proper sort of, they might even name a source, who the source is. So this is probably why some news agencies have been a bit less willing to share those pieces, because they might actually endanger a national asset, potentially. I don't know. That's what some of the generals have been saying. Some of the people saying that we shouldn't be discussing this leak because it puts assets in danger. Nonetheless, let's just see what Al Jazeera reported. So Al Jazeera says, basically Egypt apparently has supplied Russia with 40,000 rockets. They deny it. There's no basis in truth, apparently. But yes, this is awkward because Al-Sisi is, he likes America. He's big friends with America. He's who America put in after the Muslim Brotherhood took control after, what was his name? I've forgotten his name. His name's also started with an M.
Mordi?
Morsi.
Yes.
Mohammed Morsi. Yeah, I think that's the guy. Yeah, after he was overthrown in the Arab Spring. So this is now their new. I venture to say a stooge, a puppet. I don't know. I know
completely. This is the guy that Tony Blair described as the rescue of democracy. It was a general who led a coup against an elected government.
Correct. Yeah. And yes, and they are good friends with America. So yes, basically, what is it? 40,000 rockets. Let's see if there's anything else interesting here. Artillery runs and gunpowder. So yes, basically, this is the awkward one because Egypt, has been in trouble for this one. And I think, the thing is that the US knew that they had given them the Russians, that the Egyptians had given the Russians rockets because this is a US leak. So it's not a surprise to the US government, but it is awkward that everyone now has to address that. And also the Egyptians know that they know. So, there you go. The other one, of course, is then South Korea. So leaked documents and accusations of US spying spark outrage in Seoul. So this is from the New York Times. The reaction to the leak in South Korea is perhaps the strongest so far as the Biden administration scrambles to contain the damage from apparent spying on allies. Any thoughts on this one, Chris?
Yeah, so this one I find really interesting because a lot of people in the West don't know too much about South Korean politics, especially in the sort of socialist left. Then they know as much about South Korea as it's a Western creation and effectively was a puppet regime of the West as a bulwark against the communist North. The interesting thing is, in the public, that is also the perception. To a lot of people in South Korea, they feel that America have a disproportionate control over their politics. So this hitting the media as it has, I think, is going to inflame a lot of tempers in the South Korean population, and it's going to upset a lot of people who are going to be saying, why our government clearly knew this. There's no way the South Korean government didn't know that they were being spied on. The question would be, why didn't we act on it? And what are you going to do now? Are you going to tell the Americans to leave? Is there going to be any public reprimand at all? Or are the South Korean authorities going to brush it under the carpet? And unfortunately, I feel like it is going to be the latter. I feel like it's going to be a case of, as you said, everybody knew about this. This leak is the only people that are surprised by this. What's in these leaks is the public. Governments already knew all this information. Now it's in the public domain. Now the question is, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give the substance of what apparently was in the documents. So it all comes down to artillery shells. Those 155 millimeter artillery shells we discussed earlier. So the US has been pressuring the South Koreans to send these things. And the South Koreans have been saying that they would only do it if the end user was either the US, so we'll make the shells and we'll sell them to you, only if they go to America, you are the end user. Or another deal was that they would be sent to Poland, but everyone knows if you're sending shells to Poland, I mean, they're probably going to end up in Ukraine.
That's almost making it sort of say like, promise either you're using it or promise you'll never tell us who's using them. We've always got deniability that we can say we did not arm Ukraine. We just armed somebody who's arming Ukraine.
And obviously, one of the reasons that, according to the New York Times, that this has been awkward, why the Koreans are a bit tentative about sending the shells to Ukraine, is they need the Russians to help them in terms of negotiating and keeping a balance of peace or whatever with North Korea. So, yes, that's the reason why. There's the only other document I've got then, of course, is from the Global Times, the Chinese newspaper. And we do have other documents. So I don't know if we're going to go through all of those. So maybe only one of them is the freeze favorable to vehicle maneuver. Okay, 1 second. Let me just find that for you. And there are the documents. I'll just bring them up here. But I don't think we're going to go through all of those. So we'll just go maybe through the frozen stuff.
Yeah. After that, the only thing I've got here is I just want to go through a few. I've got a few basic bullet points of revelations that were in the other documents, but that we've not got time to go through. So I'll just go through them as bullet points, and we can just say our piece on each one, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'll just show this one here then. This is freeze favorable to vehicle maneuver. It shows you basically mud, frozen ground timeline. So if you haven't been following, the mud at this time of the year in Ukraine is famous. It becomes this, it's got a word, Rasputia, I think what it was called. But black, sort of thick mud, and vehicles are just sink in it. So this shows you when the ground is frozen because of winter, and when it turns to mud, and then when it's then good again, when it's not so muddy. As you can see on the timeline here, so only in mid-May do you see the mud completely fade away. So the mud is, we're in the mud phase now. So all of April is just mud, and into, you only start to get favorable conditions, I think the first week of May inwards. So looking at your lines here, you got the blue line, the yellow line, and the green line. So on where the fighting is, so Donetsk, for example, if we assume, based on these other documents, which we're not going to go through right now, they're focused on Donetsk, and they're focused on also Kharkov axis here, is that, which would be the yellow line, the mud is only going to start being a factor halfway through May, and then the green line, that's to the north, blue line. So blue line, less of a problem. So yeah, realistically, again, coming back to that 30th of April point, which all the battalions are ready, brigades are ready, sorry, the mud is only favorable a week later, let's say. And then remember, May 23 is when the air cover drops, assuming that the air cover hasn't improved and may have got worse. You're seeing a very tight window, right?
Yeah.
May 23, air cover stops, and you can only really advance properly after the first week of May. So there's only a 2-week window of decent cover then, decent operational conditions. Anyway, but yeah, Chris, let's get on to your bullet points then.
Yeah, so just to go through a few other points that obviously in terms of these documents, like you said, about 100 have entered public circulation. Apparently, there's close to 300 in total that were leaked, but most people haven't seen the full lot. So in terms of revelations that were in documents that we're not going to go through in full, we've got that the US has achieved a deep penetration of most Russian security and intelligence services. Obviously, we've seen, we've heard revelations that highly suggest this in the past anyway. Russia does seem to have a huge spy problem. Obviously, this is throwback from the Cold War. We're still very much in each other's territories in terms of our spy game. I'm sure America, well, a sense of it, Russia don't even need spies in the American military, because the American military seems to be good enough at leaking the documents themselves. Yeah. So the FSB has accused Russia's defense ministry of obfuscating, downplaying Russian casualties in Ukraine. We have touched a little bit on that. Russia is spying on its top allies, including President Vladimir Zelensky. So that, incredibly embarrassing. It'd be interesting to, if we do find the exact document of that, it'd be interesting to at least post that to find out to what extent he is being spied on. Russia's Wagner Group tried to purchase weapons from Turkey through Mali. Egypt's president selling rockets to Russia, we know that. Russia almost shot down a UK surveillance plane next to Ukraine. Russia intelligence officers claimed the United Arab Emirates wanted to help work against the US and the UK. That seems quite interesting. Obviously, it just sort of shows that the betrayal of a united front that is shown in the Western media isn't what it is, and that Russia still has very many friends. It does seem to be that people are sort of seeing it as a reckoning point of almost time to pick a side.
Yeah.
Russia hackers working with Moscow claim to have accessed Canada's natural gas infrastructure.
Okay.
Russia's Wagner Group mercenaries looked into working in Haiti. So obviously we saw, this would have been last year, I imagine, where the
prime minister was assassinated. Yeah.
And the Americans basically were talking publicly about the possibility of them effectively invading Haiti. They didn't use the word invading Haiti, but it was invading Haiti. So China held secret negotiations with Nicaragua about building a new port in the Caribbean. That would be very interesting if anything comes of that. And this last one, Serbia, a quasi-ally of Russia, has agreed to arm Ukraine.
Yes, that one is very interesting. Yeah.
So in terms of like Russian, Serbian relationships, obviously the governments are friendly enough with each other. What's really strong about that is the population of Serbia are much more friends with Russia than the government of Serbia seem to be at the moment. It seems to be that, as with a lot of former Yugoslav countries, they seem to want to have the cake and eat it. So it seems that they're almost playing both sides, which you can't blame them by the sounds of it. It seems that half of NATO are playing both sides, like Turkey. But yeah, a little bit disappointing if true.
Yeah, I think the Russians would be very disappointed in that. I know it is also a bit strange. I mean, these are the Serbs who were bombed by NATO, not even 25 years ago. You know, the bridges, the hospitals, and also, I mean, I think the Chinese might be also giving them a look at the embassy that was bombed, which actually I was listening to. It might have been the Duran or one of the other talk shows. Is that it has now come out that that was intentional. It wasn't an accident. Guided munitions were not accidentally hit a clearly marked embassy because the Chinese were actually supplying the Serbians or helping them in some way. But anyway, I think that if there's 300 documents, and bear in mind these were sitting in servers, on Discord servers and all sorts of servers for months before they were found. These are not going to go away anytime soon, as much as the Western sort of authorities would like them to. They are being published by newspapers and being looked at. You can find them. They're a little bit difficult to find, but you know they are out there. If you want us to go into any more of these, then please tell us to do so. I haven't got anything else more to add to this, Chris. Any final thoughts for yourself? Any contributions?
No, obviously, other than the fact that if anybody out there who watches us is a disgruntled member of the US military, please do send us anything that you've managed to find, and we'll post it.
Okay. I'm expecting an airstrike on your house pretty soon. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and please like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and in the comments, please give us any advice, guidance, tips, or thoughts for the future, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.